All right, perfect. So we are all here today for our cybersecurity panel, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce everybody right now. Starting with Katie Hoff, team leader of cybersecurity operations here at Wellmark Blue Cross Blue Shield. Katie, could you just introduce yourself and maybe tell us one or few things about you?
Sure. As Josh said, my name is Katie Hoff, a team leader of cybersecurity. I've been with Wellmark for over 16 years, been in cyber for about 5 now. Started off in claims, moved around a lot, found a home in cyber, finished my master's in information assurance at Iowa State a couple of years ago.
Perfect. All right, next up, we have Andy Neller. He is currently the Director of Cybersecurity Operations and Risk, as well as the HIPAA security official here at Wellmark Blue Cross Blue Shield. Andy, can you tell us a few things about yourself?
Will do. Thank you, Josh. It's probably the longest job title I've had here at Wellmark, which is saying something. I've been here a little over, well, actually, it's going to be my 20-year mark, but I've been in cyber over 25 years. One of those things that I'm just very thankful every day to be able to work in a career that I'm passionate on with, again, the people that I respect, a lot of great coworkers, some of which are on this call today. So.
Perfect. Okay, next up, third, we have Erin Reese. She is the Cybersecurity Incident Response Manager here at Wellmark. Erin, can you just introduce yourself and tell us a few things about yourself?
Sure can. I'm Erin Reese, Cybersecurity Incident Response Manager. I've been with Wellmark for about 4 years, just crossed 4 years, but I have about 20 years of experience in all areas of IT, but I've spent about the last 8 kind of focused on incident response.
Perfect. And finally, last but not least, we have Blake Roth, Director of IT Security at F&G. Blake, do you want to go ahead and tell us a few things about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I've worked in IT for probably 20 years or so now, the last 10 focused on security. When I'm not trying to keep up, despite the fact that I'm a manager and no one wants me to do real work anymore, I spend a lot of time with family, and I play ice hockey very, 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 very poorly. So.
Quite nice, quite nice. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Andrew, and he will lead us through our panel discussion.
All right, thank you, Josh. So I'm Andrew with F&G. I have nothing to do with cyber, but as you can see, we've got quite a few experts here to talk about it. So hopefully we can learn a few things. So we have some interesting questions here. We'll kind of ask the question, and whoever wants to raise their hand first can speak to it, but gotta warn you, if you're going to stay quiet, I'm just going to throw a couple at you. So I want to hear from everybody if we can, but let's start here. So what do you feel is the biggest cyber threat today, either to people or organizations?
This is Andy. If you want, I can kick it off. One of the things that I've seen as we interact with, whether it's other Blue Cross Blue Shield organizations or other folks in the local area here, very fortunate to have some partnerships with a lot of the local CISOs. And one of the things that I tend to see is, while there's lots of things that you can mention from like a phishing perspective or the nation state actors, or we're doing security awareness, one of the fundamental things that I see that's really affecting kind of people and organizations today is, I want to say, the lack of certain like sponsorship into executive security programs. One of the things we're very fortunate here at Wellmark is, since we're a mutual company kind of owned by our members, over time in my tenure here, we've really enjoyed executive support for our security program. So we've been able to really move the needle fundamentally, because change is really driven from the top down. And I see a lot of organizations don't always have that luxury, and that really kind of shows in what they're able to deliver in their long-term security objective, because they're either constantly firefighting because they don't necessarily have the staff budget or time, or they don't have the right tool enablement to really kind of carry things forward, and they're not focusing in on the fundamentals like patch hygiene, asset management, mapping things to risk. So I think today that's one of the biggest things that I see fundamentally that we run into. If you look at the root of some of these different issues facing either people or cybersecurity kind of organizations, it gets into the fact that, again, back in that executive support to really enable the technologies, tools, and processes, help facilitate the overall security program that kind of protect the people in the organizations as well.
Great, thank you. So as you mentioned, there's a lot of threats out there. Is there any particular things that you might suggest that people focus on maybe employees or public sector folks that they should stop doing to limit those threats?
So this is Blake. I'll take a stab at that. To me, it's pay attention, right? There's nothing new under the sun. A lot of the techniques that whether it's fraud or crime that people are using are the same things we've been doing since the dawn of time. But we're now doing more and more online, right? We've got our phones with us everywhere we go, and people forget that they're traveling, right? If you get off a cruise ship at a port and there's a bunch of people trying to sell you, authentic beads, your hackles are going to go up. You're going to pay attention. But when you walk around skimming the web on your phone, buying things, you're not taking the same precautions you would elsewhere. So to me, simply being aware that people are going to try and trick you and that there are bad things out there is a huge first step that a lot of people simply don't pay attention to, I think.
I would agree with that. In my security awareness work, a lot of what I try to reinforce with people is there's no such thing as a free lunch. Anything that you're going to get, you're going to exchange probably some information about yourself to get that. And, you really need to be cautious with what you're giving away to just anybody, whether it's in person or on the internet.
Great. Thank you for those responses. So do you think there's an application you think people could use to improve their personal security, thinking along the lines of like a VPN, firewalls, things like that, that are easily accessible for the general public?
I'll go ahead with that one. I think a big one would be a password vault. So passwords are so easy and people will come up with whatever's easy, their dog's name, their date of birth, anything like that. With a password vault, then you can come up with complex, longer passwords that take much more time and effort to try to brute force. You can hold it, you can have it on your phone, you can have it on your computer, it'll hold it for you, you can copy paste it from there, anything like that, since we use passwords everywhere. In addition to that, I think multi-factor authentication. So there are lots of auth apps that people can download and use to help secure their password and login information.
So just in case there's some laymen in here, you wanted to elaborating a bit on multi-factor authentication and password vaults, like what exactly would those do? Or what are they?
Sure. Yes. So password vault is just a place to hold your passwords. It's very secure. They encrypt your passwords, so they jumble them up so they can't be read by anybody, and they just hold them for you. For multi-factor authentication, normally when you're logging into something, you log in with a password. That's something you know. When you add another layer, like something you have, it could be a token or it could be your cell phone. You can receive a SMS text with a one-time code to help you log in, or you can go into the application on your phone and approve the login. That way, if somebody does get your password, then they can't necessarily get to that next step of logging in without having your device.
I think that's a great answer, Kate. And I think to kind of chime in a little, to add in, I like to cheat a little bit. So one of the password vault applications that I use rather frequently is 1Password. Since not only can help secure and again create those complex passwords, but it also supports kind of that multi-factor aspect and kind of that one-stop shopping versus having to leverage like the Google Authenticator or the Microsoft Authenticator. Not saying that there's not going to be specific instances where you won't have to use those different technologies, but it kind of helps simplify it, because I found that in the early adoption of these different authenticator apps, especially if you're using it on your mobile device, as you go to migrate mobile devices, you may lose access to that kind of that initial seed. And so that makes it a little difficult to then access those accounts and actually recover and re-enable a multi-factor option. Whereas technologies like 1Password, it enables you to then sync that across multiple devices. It makes it easier to kind of move along through your transition as you go through different mobile devices or different areas.
I just want to stress that password vaults or password managers are super easy to use now, right? The whole trick is I only have to remember one password now. And I know that we always try to make people remember long, complex passwords, and people forget them and they get frustrated and they don't like that. This helps with that, right? You can still have a unique, complex password, and maybe you never even see it in your life. For each and every different website you go to, the different banks, all the different places you need to have a password, you only have to remember it once. The one password unlocks all of your other passwords. And with some of the applications, like you mentioned, it makes it really easy to auto-populate that for you too. So we talk about encryption and MFA and other acronyms, and people's eyes glaze over sometimes. This is meant to be easy. The password manager is easy, and it's good and important and helpful. So you're not using the same password that you're using for your shopping and banking, and also for Pinterest and some recipe site. Use different passwords, but only remember one. Easy is the key, I think.
Great
My
response.
phone allows me to use my face to log into it too.
Oh. Yeah, I definitely get the pain points with the password stuff. Blake knows with F&G, we change our passwords a lot. So, so I kind of want to elaborate just a little bit, because I know that something becoming a lot more mainstream is VPNs. So could any of you elaborate a little bit on how that might go towards helping secure your data in this cybersecurity threatening world?
I can chime in. I just don't want to dominate the conversation. We have a lot of great experts on the call today, but I know from a perspective of like when you use it and how to use it, and that not all VPNs are created equal. So for example, I know we keep dropping names here like 1Password and the like, but like I like to use NordVPN, and that's one of the ones that I found from a perspective of delivering on what I expect to kind of secure the connections. So when I'm in a coffee shop and everyone else has the same, password to get on that secure network, it's possible for an attacker to leverage that information to then potentially attack my systems or intercept my information to try and steal like user IDs and passwords. By using a VPN like NordVPN, when I get onto that non-trusted or less trusted network, I can then leverage that as an additional layer of encryption to make it more difficult for that adversary or someone attacking to get access to my information. And then you can really leverage that, as you're on the go, or depending on the technologies or wherever you're at, like the airport. I guess not so much during the pandemic anymore, but when you get into, yeah, so the good thing, Andrew, it's a non-sponsored webinar. So as we get into things, knowing the circumstances and situations, and then also as you research them, because there's lots of VPN options you have out there, not all of them are created equal. And I know sometimes people think when they think VPN, they think Tor or something that is just used by criminals. And that's not always the case anymore, because you have many different flexible options you can do from a consumer to help, to give that extra layer of security, because those of you who use, I won't name any names, but local Iowa HighSpeed providers, they're intercepting your traffic. And not saying you're doing anything you want to necessarily hide, but if they get breached, how is their security? So as they're intercepting your information, and occasionally it becomes readily apparent when they pop up saying, hey, you may be approaching your bandwidth cap. How did they pop up that, that notification into your browser? It's not like you browse their site. It's a good view into the fact that they're already interception or in between your communication. This kind of takes them out of that. So that way, again, you're protecting your information not only from a hostile attacker, but then also these different upstream providers that you may not realize are capturing bits of your traffic on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think your examples, coffee shop and airport, are good use cases for a VPN, right? Because what you're really doing, though, is just changing who has access to your traffic, right? If you're at home and whoever your ISP is, whoever's providing you that internet, they're going to be able to look in and see what your traffic is. If you're using the VPN, though, you're allowing that company to look in and see what your traffic is. So at the airport, at a coffee shop, you may not know who's actually providing the internet. It may not be who you think it is. And so it's great to be able to circumvent that. At home, for most of us, I don't think we're too worried about, the local ISP browsing our traffic. It's neat in places that are, maybe during the uprising in Egypt, and they were trying to have free speech and it was denied. VPNs helped a lot there. I think for most of us, most of the time, VPN's not a big deal, not too important, but being able to use something, if you're going to use an unsecured Wi-Fi somewhere, VPN might not be a bad idea. Oh, we lost our moderator.
Yep, so I'm going to go ahead and move to the next question. So question 4 that we got, how can we help the older population in our community better recognize a potentially dangerous cyber criminal or scam? Any advice, any input? What do you guys got?
Well, part of my role here at Wellmark, in addition to incident response, is actually security awareness. So I spend a lot of time working with our employee population and educating them, old or young, because young people coming into the workforce aren't used to some of the threats. A lot of it is really just changing the perspective that whoever is on the other end of this is there with good intent. Often people just assume everybody has good intent, and unfortunately, I think when you're talking about the internet and email and cybersecurity, you have to come in with a skeptical eye and a critical look at everything. And so that's one of the things that I'm just constantly reinforcing to people. Like Blake said earlier, stop, take a look at it, read it carefully. What are you giving up in exchange for whatever you want? And is it really worth it? There are some things that should never be negotiable. Personal information, your social security number, birthday, address, all of that stuff, hold that tight, and you shouldn't give it up unless there's a really good reason for you to give that up. And just always acting with that attitude of protecting yourself, no matter what you're doing, I think will go a long way, young or old.
I would add that just because they're old people doesn't mean they're stupid people, right? We're all hopefully going to become old. That's my goal, at least. Scams aren't new. Grifters aren't new. They've lived this long. They've got an idea. Just remind them, when you're online, just act like you're in a bad part of town, right? Be careful. Don't trust everybody that contacts you. Stop and think before you respond. Little things help, right?
I like the comment that just got thrown into chat on the organization conducting penetration testing, kind of if so, and kind of what kind, because I'm a firm believer in doing that type of adversary emulation, because if you're not actively, checking your own environment, especially on a regular, most frequent basis, then you're the attackers are going to identify these vulnerabilities before you have the opportunity to. So one of the things that we used to do, we went from annual penetration testing to quarterly penetration testing, and now we're doing continuous penetration testing. And sometimes a lot of companies mistake the vulnerability assessments versus penetration testing. And one of the things for the difference between vulnerability assessment and penetration testing is, from a penetration test perspective, the company or the individual, the person conducting the test, actually tries to exploit the vulnerability. So there's no, I want to say, false positives that you may get when someone conducts like a vulnerability scan and says, well, it looks like you're vulnerable to this. In a penetration scan, the person's actually going to say, well, I then exploited this, and this is what I was able to do with that information. And so we perform all sorts of different ones, whether it's application specific as we're making code changes, or kind of the overall estate of our kind of total ecosystem. Because one of the things that we found, being a health insurance company, PHI is heavily targeted and heavily valued on the dark web. And so people are constantly trying to, hit our organization to the tune of, I think we're up to we're consuming like 2.6 billion events a day or something along those lines. So, and that's with us blocking non-US based countries, because we're an Iowa and South Dakota based company. So if you can think of the geometric scale that these adversaries are attacking these organizations, it's critically important that your organization is doing those types of assessments, because if you don't find it, they will, but then you have to do something and act on that information.
Great. So I know we do have a question in the chat, but we'll go ahead and save that for the end here, just to kind of keep things on track. But great responses. Thank you. So I guess we'll move on here. So what kind of things do you think we should be, or are we doing to keep fresh talent, students in particular, interested in the cybersecurity field? We want to be able to attract them to it, help give new perspective and insight, and also retain them to keep working and get to positions that you all hold someday.
This is an interesting one to me, because honestly, in the grand scheme of things, IT as a profession is still relatively new, right? And so by that, cybersecurity as a profession is an infant, right? And I'm old enough that cybersecurity as a degree or a thing you could go learn didn't exist when I started out, right? People that wound up working in cybersecurity kind of fell backwards into it because, you know, you were good at it, you were interested or whatever. And now when we're recruiting, there's people that have got, you know, either a 2-year degree, a 4-year degree, a master's degree without ever having worked in, you know, outside of here, you know, worked in their field yet. There's lots of new pipelines. And the thing is that I think that cybersecurity isn't one discipline anymore. There are so many different areas. And like we talked about pen testing a minute ago, that's a cool, shiny, flashy one that everybody wants to get excited about. But there's so many different things, right? There's all sorts of opportunities there. And I think if you've got a traditional background coming out through infrastructure or application development, there's paths into cybersecurity from that. I think that I've looked at hiring folks that have a customer service background into security because, you know, the skills are there and the people are there. And we talk about there's a shortage of cybersecurity talent. I don't think that's the case. I think there's a shortage of senior talent, but we've got to start growing people to be able to get them there. So just kind of my take on it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you there, Blake. One of the things I know that we look for is constantly the attitude and aptitude. And I know Katie, not to throw her out there, but, you know, great example. You know, she came to us from a non-traditional cybersecurity background. And then she went up to the ranks, you know, from, you know, analyst, engineer, now leading that department. So if you find the right skill set and you have the right, you know, resourcing to train that skill set, a lot of these different avenues on here, you know, you can find the individual that's good at problem solving and, you know, and then mold that into the opportunity. So it's kind of the always be training, always be mentoring. And I know one of the reasons that, you know, for our team is we're always looking for that next, you know, talent that's going to be coming on the team, even when we don't have an open position. So that way, when a position does open up, we're able to then, you know, we've got a couple people that are in the wings, whether internally or externally, that we've had an opportunity to be constantly, I would say, grooming over the years. But I do think that Blake's right on the money from a perspective of looking at non-traditional talent, which is why, like when we do our security awareness activities, we have a capture the flag event because it's open to the entire company. And we are really exploring everything from different avenues of how people solve different types of challenges, whether or not they come from IT. And we've got some great resources like out of our claims area, and just, you know, identifying those hidden gems you may not have looked at, or people may not have thought that they had a path into that cybersecurity field or discipline.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally agree with that as well. One of the things that when I'm looking at people, I don't care what their degree is in, it's what skills do you have and how can you utilize those? I have an accounting degree. I've never worked as an accountant, but I have an accounting degree. I've always worked in security and in IT, but I actually got into incident response because I managed disaster recovery, and those skills that I had from planning and executing disaster recovery translated perfectly into planning and executing incident response. And my employer at the time saw that and moved me into that role. And I try to do the same thing when I'm looking at people to fill roles.
We have
Great,
a
thank you.
3-time CTF winner that Walmart did, and his background is actually, well, his area is actually procurement.
Yeah.
So no technical whatsoever, but has won our CTF 3 different times. So it
All
could be
right,
anywhere.
don't worry, I won't be interrupting anyone again.
Oh, you're fine.
So this kind of bleeds right into the next question pretty well, actually. So if someone doesn't necessarily have the background in security, maybe someone like myself, I'm just, you know, a processing grunt, right? How can they find a role in security, you know, amongst one of your teams, perhaps?
Chicken and the egg question.
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of places, they want you to have experience, but you can't get experience without getting in necessarily. I would recommend, if you're in college or whatnot, internships. So I know there are lots of internships all around that offer cybersecurity experience that you can add on. I know some companies, I know Walmart does the TA program. So the technology associate that rotates people in there. So every 6 months, we have a new person that joins our team to learn cybersecurity, and they get that experience and that exposure. They get to do hands-on projects for us, and we don't just give them grunt work or just random, here's paperwork. We give them actual, hey, I need you to go create this WAF to secure this part of the organization or to secure this gap for us. And they do it, and they get to count that as experience. There are also various hack the box or try hack me, I don't want to say applications, websites out there that you can go to and just try to level, they make it into games, but you basically level up and you can get experience and knowledge that way. There are many conventions all around, like in April, KernelCon over in Omaha, they will have some really great keynote speakers that will be there and you can listen to, and they'll have different competitions and they'll have classes. And Black Hills Information Security has an anti-siphon program, and it's pay what you can. In addition to that, there's YouTube videos and a whole bunch of resources that are available on the internet to learn and to get experience from. And by building all of that up and by showing that, hey, I built this home lab, or I've been working on this on my own, that will catch people's eyes on resumes.
And I think it's important to remember that cybersecurity is not all just technical and code and solving challenges. I'm not super technical. I don't have access to the firewall or any of that stuff. They don't let me have that kind of access. There's a part of security that is not technical, that utilizes business skills, those soft skills that definitely come from other roles in companies. So like my story of disaster recovery to incident response, you find those parallels where you've got those skills. I always tell people, like Katie knows, when we're interviewing for interns or new people, one of the first questions I ask is, do you like to write? Because that's really important. It's really important to be a good, strong writer in cybersecurity. We need our documentation. We need knowledge base, and we need to keep up on that. That's a really important skill, and that has absolutely nothing to do with technology.
There's a local group, Suck DSM, also, that you can get involved in, and they do monthly meetings. Sorry, whoever I interrupted.
Oh no, that's all right. I think there's a lot of opportunities for education. Katie described well, and I think, Aaron, you've highlighted that you don't necessarily have to be, wearing a black hoodie in your mom's basement to be a hacker and to get into security. The other thing, though, is that if you don't have a program like you've described that you have at Walmart, go talk to your security team. They're probably underfunded and understaffed, and would love to know that somebody is interested in at least learning what they do, even if you don't wind up helping them. I think a lot of times we're the bad guys. We're the department of no. People want to avoid us. We spend a lot of time, I think, trying to shake that image, but it's tough because sometimes you do have to say no. So, we walk in a room and people scatter. So if you're interested in the job, go talk to someone doing it. And then there's probably someone anywhere you're working that is in that department or in that role. And that, they can say, oh, well, provide insight on you specifically, what things they think you might be good at, or what they need, or how they got in, and just go ask.
That's a great point. There might be some little thing that you could help with that gets, your foot in the door, helping them with some small task that they just can't hit because they're not staffed appropriately for it. And then, you're helping them, and that creates a great impression. And the next time they have an opening, you're right there.
Yeah, I don't know how many times someone has said they're interested, and how do you get into that? And my reaction is almost always, oh wow, I had no idea. Yeah, hang on, let's talk, because there's opportunities. There's plenty of opportunities.
It's easy to job shadow.
Well, you're all making me kind of think about putting my hat in the ring. Very persuasive. But I would say, is there anything that you're perhaps doing, maybe working with HR to sort of do outreach, maybe try and get some of that talent that you suspect might be within the ranks already?
Like Katie had mentioned, and actually lots of people have mentioned, we're always kind of doing that talent hunting, always looking, always watching. So like job shadowing. I know that's how kind of Katie came over to our group initially. And as we're finding people with the right attitude and aptitude, kind of find those opportunities and working with their leadership where we can find opportunities. And I think Wellmark has been very good about kind of helping to facilitate that with our existing workload to allow us to have them for a certain period of time. And like Katie mentioned, kind of sitting down with them and finding areas of opportunity where, or of interest from them to where they can start interacting with our group so we can kind of find out, if that is something that they can pursue long term. Because, like I know Blake had mentioned, there's a lot of people that probably never even thought about going to cybersecurity, or that's not their current career path, but they have the right, baseline skills or the fundamentals that can grow into those resources from a long-term value perspective. And so I know for us, Katie had mentioned a few, like with our technology association partnerships, with our internship. We do a lot of stuff with our ongoing outreach, like Aaron had mentioned, with our security awareness programs. But it's a continual effort. It's one of those things that you have to constantly be doing and make an effort and encouraging people and providing those opportunities to find those diamonds in the rough for that next tier talent that will be filling those positions.
And you had asked specifically if we're working with HR at all. So when we do have an opening, I don't think HR always likes it, but I try to change the way they do things, right? Please don't screen people that don't have a college degree. Please don't screen out people that don't have immediate and obvious direct experience. Let us talk to some of these people that maybe don't seem quite as obvious to you. We can help look through the resumes, we can help do phone screenings, but just casting a broader net. And again, I don't think that a lot of people outside of security understand what the heck we do, really, right? It's such a broad field now. There's so many different things. Yeah, we've got firewalls and we do penetration tests and incident response, but there's a lot of other things. Identity access management requires a lot of people skills and organizational skills and just pure logic. And some of if you're worried about configuration management, you need to be able to speak the language of different technical teams. You need to be able to talk to risk or legal or compliance. It's a broad net. And so I think that HR and folks outside of security may not understand some of the skill sets that are required. If you can't work on a firewall, what are you doing in security is a little outdated, perhaps.
All right, thank you for your responses. Those are really insightful. I especially like what you're doing with HR there, Blake. As you're all probably aware, there are constant threats and they're ever changing in the world, especially when it comes to cybersecurity. So how would you say an individual or an organization might protect themselves?
I think the easiest thing would be education. I mean, knowing, just being aware as an individual that there are threats out there. And as Blake has said, they're not new, they're just different. So individually being aware, knowing you don't have to know all of the fancy tools and gadgets, but know, hey, I don't think there's really a prince in Nigeria that needs money from me. Don't click the link, stuff like that.
Yeah, if the FBI is coming to arrest you, they're not going to send me a gift card to avoid the arrest. Thing, but like you're getting into, being aware and vigilant, and I think also communicating to your friends and family. Again, I know the pandemic's thrown a monkey wrench into family gatherings and the like, but one of the things we always try to say is kind of raise the tide of all ships. And just because you're aware and educated on a topic doesn't mean your friends and family are. And while the hackers are communicating different tools, techniques, and tactics amongst themselves, we need to help a neighbor out, be that resource when you're having conversations with them when it comes up, make them aware and have them spread the word, because, that's how people, the education is what's going to combat some of these different threats that are facing them. And like you said, things may have changed from a perspective of how they're attacking you, because maybe before it only would have been on a phone call, but now they're sending text messages or, different emails. But making people aware or knowing where to go to turn if they need help, or just, again, educating the kind of the different scams that are out there. It may seem obvious to us if we're in cybersecurity, but it may not be as obvious to our friends and family. And getting that word out and having them be cautious. That education is just key.
Yeah, and I think organizationally, having a plan, like it doesn't matter how beginner it is, just having a plan, and part of that's probably very biased because that's what I do, but having how are we going to respond to our biggest threats, and starting from somewhere and making sure people know about it and know their part, and hopefully practice it through some exercises and revise it, update it, expand it, keep it a living document, but have a plan and make sure it gets socialized.
I'm a big fan of Douglas Adams, so don't panic, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt aren't going to help. Situational awareness is good, but we're not going to eliminate all potential cyber threats. I think that's how one of these questions was originally worded, was what can we do to eliminate all potential cyber? You can't, right? So just take a deep breath. It's going to be okay, but think about the risk, right? Not every house has bars on the windows. For some of us, a deadbolt is enough. For some of us, leaving the door wide open is okay, right? Not all risk is equal. And just think about what you're protecting and whether or not you should be panicked about it, right? If you give someone your social security number and your bank account information, that's probably an important thing you want to protect. If all I ever gave you was my email address, well, maybe not as important, but just think about the risk and panic accordingly, I guess, if you're so inclined, but it's not going to be, it's going to be okay. We're all going to live through this.
Very optimistic. I like that. So just to kind of expand on that a little bit, anybody who's worked in a modern company knows that you get those little tests for phishing. I have never failed one ever, but maybe we could talk a little bit about the phishing and the threats. I mean, they're getting pretty tricky with those these days. Is there anything you can give some general advice that might help us avoid the pitfalls of definitely not failing those tests?
Don't click the link.
Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Don't click links.
Stop all the clicking, but no, I do think that education awareness, but like you'd mentioned, things are getting a lot more crafty. I know one of the things that we saw as an industry perspective is when you have these different crime war groups, when they're getting their ransoms and things paid in Bitcoin or name your cryptocurrency, and then those cryptocurrencies went through the roof, they're now flush with cash. So, a lot of those reinvestments into there. So now they're hiring marketing companies, they're doing ransomware as a service. And so a lot of these different campaigns that are coming in are very well polished. So when it comes into your user community, it's, making sure that you're enabling them to succeed, because I do believe that people want to make the best decisions. They just may not be armed with the right information at the right time. And so the closer we can get to that just-in-time education and awareness to help them make better decisions on the types of threats that they face, or the campaigns that we're seeing. I know here at Wellmark, we drive our phishing campaigns that we do internally, driven by our threat intelligence arm. So, seeing what the adversaries will be sending our way or what they're currently sending our way, and then educating our workforce to those types of threats, and then being creative and helping the users help themselves. We implemented something called the hatchery, to where it's the kind of a internet safety net, as it were, from a perspective of making sure that the users, if they're struggling with some of the educational opportunities, it limits the amount of internet that they can get to kind of restricting it down to the internet sites that we know are business related. So that way, if they do click on a malicious link or something that came in from a phishing perspective, they don't have access to that information. So it allows the opportunity for the user to still do what they're doing within the organization, but giving them that additional safety net that if they don't spot the campaign, it's not going to be detrimental to the organization. But that's one of the things that unfortunately is good we can do in an organization, but kind of harder to do personally, because you don't have those services readily available. So it gets back to that education and awareness, and again, telling your friends and family of the types of threats that they're facing to kind of help reducing that footprint or the exposure that they have to those types of scams.
Yeah, I think from an individual's perspective, even if it looks like it's something if it came from someone but you weren't expecting it, seems a little odd, don't click on it. You can usually look up the number independently and call back and find a way out of band to validate. The other thing was organizationally, I think a lot of internal communications and marketing teams send out updates that look a lot like phishing, right? So we get feedback from end users on the one hand saying, can you please make these phishing tests not so real? I don't like it. It wasn't fair. Well, it's got to look like the real ones because we're trying to train you. On the other hand, legitimate, and not just at F&G, I've seen this a lot of places, legitimate internal communication looks and smells a lot like phishing. So we'll get false reports because it didn't come from the person who it's signed by, or there's a weird link, or this survey monkey thing, what is this? Just things like that. If you can work with corporate communications or internal marketing or whoever it is that's sending these things and help them not send things that look like phishing, it'll help stop training. We'll stop training people to click on things that look like phishing as well.
And you can always go directly to the website and enter your information. You get a bank statement that needs you to validate something. Go directly to the website, log in yourself, and check, or call their 800 number that you have on the back of your card.
Yeah, so don't click on the link, just type it in.
Yeah.
Great. Well, this has all been very enlightening for me in particular. I know a lot of our folks here are already technically minded, so tried not to bore them too much, but you've all been very entertaining. I'd like to hand things over to Mark Morano. He's going to handle the Q&A, and I think we've already got a couple queued up for you. So Mark?
We do have a lot of tremendous questions in the chat, so I'm just going to go ahead and start with the top. Anne answered a really, really fun topic as it pertains to what we're hearing right now from national media regarding the concerns of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Does the panel have any insight into what that could potentially do, not only affecting individuals, but large companies?
So I'll say that obviously the potential risk is real, right? And there's going to be an increase in volume probably, and targeted attacks as well. But I don't think it changes anything we've talked about, right? For most people and most users, you don't need to worry too much about attribution, by which I mean you don't need to worry about who is sending you the bad thing or who is trying to come at you. You just need to practice some basic hygiene, right? Try and keep, use those password managers, try and keep your stuff patched and up to date. Don't fall for obvious scams, keep your sensors up, so to speak. And for most people, it's not going to make a big difference whether, Russia has decided they want to do something more versus anyone else, state actor or otherwise, wanting to do something more. The same basics really apply, I think, for most of us.
I agree with Blake. I mean, you should always be vigilant. You should always be aware that this is going to happen. We might see an uptick in it, but it's not going to change how we secure ourselves or our organizations.
From a business operations perspective, does anyone on the panel have concerns about, our business ops being affected by third parties going down due to the uptick in traffic that could come from overseas?
So supply chain risk is a big deal, and it's become a much bigger deal over the last several years. And a lot of regulations now require that you do some supply chain risk analysis and third-party risk assessments as part of your key supply chains. So yeah, absolutely, there's risk associated with that, but your risk is going to vary. So take the time up front to make sure you understand who you're doing business with, what their exposure is, what they're doing about it. Are they following the same set of requirements that you would expect anybody internally to follow? That sort of thing. And most of us are compelled to do that now anyway. So yes, it's a risk, but it's just one risk of many, right? And I think most of us here are insurance people, and I think we ought to be able to understand how to accept risk in some cases. So.
Thank you for that insight, Blake. Sally is wondering she's thinking about signing up for a VPN for her home and office security, and was wondering if there's one that's better than the other. I know Andy mentioned NordVPN, and I know this isn't a sponsored webinar, but does anyone else have any ideas on where to look for resources of that nature?
I use Nord, so I can't give you a different answer on that one.
Biased.
I don't use Nord. I have nothing against Nord. I think it's essentially a commodity. It's just, do you trust the company that's offering it or not? So maybe spend 5 minutes looking them up to make sure that they are a legitimate company. Other than that, I'm not sure it matters too much. Just kind of preference.
Features.
Features, and like I said, going through and although I would say, take advantage of certain things like Cyber Monday because, well, again, I enjoy using Nord. Day to day tends to be a little bit more expensive, but Cyber Monday they super discount it, so you can get a nice 3-year subscription for pennies on the dollar. And from a high speed perspective, whether you're using streaming content, they have different high speed servers. So, like I said, features, options, and kind of doing your research and just checking into. But I know that one I've looked into, and for my needs, it fits the bill.
Sally has another question that was really, really good regarding pseudonyms. So when it comes to consumers and our personal privacy, whether it be names, addresses, and whatnot, how do you all feel about employers and educators using numbers or numbers in the form of in some encrypted nature in lieu of real names? And would that make things a bit safer?
Well, I can take a comment. Any type of data masking can always help, especially as it gets into how attackers then leverage that information, whether using attacks like what's called like credential stuffing, or where they get information from another site and try to use it against you in your other sites or presence that you have online. So any type of way to go through and remove that consistency to where, like, I'm not known as Andy to the site, I'm some numeric value or some combination of an encrypted value that you know me as. It makes it that much more complex or difficult for the attacker to then leverage that information in other scenarios. So I'm always a big fan of any sort of data masking you can get into as it gets into specifics and within that organization. But sometimes it can be a bit complex. So organizations, go by the wayside when it comes down to doing those type of hygiene. So I am a fan. It's just I wish more organizations would do it.
In regards to malware infections or anything else where they actually send you something that you need to click on, I don't think it's really going to matter because the email is still going to come through. The user could still potentially click on the link, enter their information from there. It would definitely help with spear phishing. So anybody that's going out looking for CEOs or board member information and can find your email address, it would help reduce that.
An extension onto that consumer privacy, obviously things like California privacy and the GDPR compliance laws in Europe are a huge topic and really benefit the consumer. But how have you seen policies like those affect your business and the potential, productivity that your IT teams have when tasked with complying to those policies?
So as a citizen, I'm a huge fan. I think the right to be forgotten and privacy is great. As a practitioner, those things can be a nightmare to implement, right? If you've got 30 years of doing business without that as a consideration, you've got a lot of work to do to clean up and get implemented. I think it's worth it personally because I think it's important, but it's a nightmare. It's tough. I mean, if you're a startup and you got greenfield, you can set up the right processes from the beginning, and that helps. I do think that for GDPR, it's really difficult. California kind of went out of their way and carved a lot of exceptions into it. So to the point where if you're not reselling customer information, most of it doesn't actually apply to you. So that one's not as bad to become compliant with. So again, based on the idea that I believe in privacy and the right to be forgotten, I'm not as big a fan of it. But as a fan of someone that doesn't want to make people work nights and weekends all the time, it was all right from that perspective.
Yeah, from an IT employee in my own company, I know how that can be when these compliances come down and websites get audited. So from a ops perspective, but I think it's really, these are really pushing us forward. So it's good in that nature. Paige was wondering, how are the companies measuring the attacks on your organizations, and how can you measure the withstand of those attacks? And are most stopped without anyone really knowing? and an extension on that, how many actually make it through the front door and are handled behind the scenes?
I think that kind of depends on the organization. So I know depending on the audience, there's different degrees of how you report on the information. So I'd mentioned, our SIM, we're consuming, like 2.6 some billion events, but that's a combination of all sorts of different things. That's not just, people banging on the front door to get in the organization. So one of the things that we look at is, perimeter blocks, while we report off of that, it's kind of getting into, it's a hard barometer to get into, just because of, if you see, 10 million attacks, is that good, bad, 20 million? I think your question really got to the root of it. Well, what's making it through there and what's not being automatically dealt with? Because we lean a lot into our organization on preventative controls and kind of dealing with the adversaries automatically. And so I think a good barometer is, what is your team having to respond to from like when that event becomes more of a incident or something that you have to get into. So a lot of time in the industry, we talk about that kind of mean time to detect and mean time to respond. And that's really one thing we focus in on here at Walmart is, how quickly can we pick on something that may have gone through the initial controls, responding to that, because we found that the quicker that you can respond to that and remediate it, it lessens that potentially impact the organization before it necessarily becomes a breach or an incident. So from our perspective, while you may have millions of events that are going on and kind of hits against that front door, the amount of stuff that you have to respond to from our security operations center is a small fraction of that if you've got your defense in depth set up appropriately within your organization. But I think it's one of those things, your mileage may vary, because depending upon how your organization is set up those control structures, we've been very fortunate, going back into one of my original comments about having the executive support for our security program. We've done a lot of things over time to really move the needle. But that's really, that security is that journey and a marathon, not a sprint. And so we've had, that time to put in those controls over time to reduce that overall footprint of what's getting through the ecosystem that we have to respond to. Whereas depending upon whether it's a personal network or a organization that may not have that institutional support for the security program, it's going to vary from business to business, I think.
Yeah, I think you got it right. I'm also really curious to hear Aaron's answer to that same question, because you've got a slightly different perspective, right?
Right. Well, yeah, it kind of goes back to what Andy said. Like, to me, when we're talking as a team about something that's going on, I'm like, well, is it my problem? If I have to get involved, that's a big deal. And so that's kind of how I look at, how are things going around here, is how many things have I gotten called in on, in recent memory? Has it been a lot? Has it declined? Is it rising? And that sort of thing. And, from a previous employer, here it's a lot less than it used to be. I used to be one of many, and here I'm the only one. So I think that shows that. But I think for me at least, when you get to the point of implementing the response process, that's when I count it as, it's in the door, it's a big deal, because you're pulling your resources off of something else and putting them on this. And like Andy said, we would rather be putting our resources into the prevention instead of into the remediation.
Yeah, so all those billions of data points coming in, hopefully automated controls pick up most of the bad things, and those that slip through to response, those are the things that are interesting. And hopefully, if things are going well, those are few and far between.
Exactly.
Aaron, when you mentioned the resources, that really leads into the next question I had on when you do get pulled into those events, how much time you and your resources are you determining and assessing the risk of the things that are trying to, knock on the door? It may be, as Andy mentioned, a script that's just, pinging your servers and not really risking anything, but then you have greater issues like phishing campaigns or whatnot. So how much of your job do you really do that assessment?
So the assessment of what's going on is absolutely essential. So whoever's finding the event is going to come in with their initial assessment. What do they know? What do they, think? What do we not know? What do we think's going on? And then, if we feel it needs a larger response, pull in other people, share that information with them and send them out, to look at that. And we're trying to keep that analysis time, at least initially, pretty quick, so that we can respond quickly, stop bleeding, triage the process, pull in the right resources to make sure that, we're preventing anything from spreading. We don't have, collateral damage, we're shutting things down, or sectioning things off, that sort of thing. So, that analysis of what's going on and what's impacted and that sort of thing needs to be very rapid, and it needs to be kind of done continuously. Once the team has been brought in and they're working on a problem, we still have to keep our eyes on what's going on outside, in the rest of the environment, because there could be other problems going on at the same time, and we don't want to lose focus on those by having that tunnel vision. So it's something that gets done quickly, but done regular, often, because you have to be constantly reassessing. And as time goes on, you're going to probably have a greater impact, because you're going to have operations that are impacted, and now you're going to have to be communicating with those people and letting them know what's going on, what to expect, how to communicate back to you, that sort of thing.
I know we'd love to hear the other panelists' opinion on that. I know, part of the appeal of the cybersecurity field is that everything can change on a dime. So that total reassessment sounds like it's an inherent need. So I have one more question from Brian, real quick. How does your organization know where sensitive or PII data is stored and maintained throughout the enterprise, whether it's structured or unstructured?
So structured data is easier, right? Because typically you've got some tables that are well defined, and you can, there's lots of tools to help find those. Unstructured data is typically more difficult, because lots of times those repositories were more organically grown than designed and planned. But there's tools, again, that you can help find that, right? So then once you go through and identify them, then you got to figure out what are the rules for managing them, and then make sure that you're actually implementing and managing and monitoring and all the fun stuff to make sure that that non-public information is all being handled according to Hoyle. And it's not pretty or easy.
Thank you,
There are
Blake.
various scanning tools that can also label, that helps with it. We rely on our application portfolio, so the development teams to check, yes, there is, no, there's not. It's not completely accurate, but it tries to give us a better idea.
Well, I know that it's 12:59 and we all have our next meetings to get to. So thank you to the panelists. We really appreciate your time and that you've come in here to give us all this really awesome information.